an organization for some of the things that we want to do on a broader scale. So my areas of expertise happen to fall in line with transportation and infrastructure, common tech, although, you know, I'm shocked I got to the ability to share my screen. That's a first for me, so don't feel bad, Ian. And then I also deal in some energy and environment issues. So I'll get into a variety of things in my presentation. I'm just thrilled to be here today, sort of share our experience. Hopefully you guys can learn from some of what we did and what we do as an organization, and where we're moving in a particular direction and why, and happy to answer any questions along the way. So thanks a lot, Tola. Appreciate being here.
Thank you to both John and Ian. Why don't we have Krish and Jamie and James introduce themselves, just so we get a sense of who's in the virtual room with us this morning, and then we'll get to Ian and John.
Sure. Do you want me to go first, Tola? This is Krish.
Yes, please.
Great. I hope you guys can hear me properly.
Yep.
My name is Krish Pandia. I'm a managing partner at a small development firm called Oak Moss Associates. And we have a couple of projects we are working on in Hazelwood, Pittsburgh, which is an opportunity zone. And the projects are actually quite varied. We've got one family rental development with about 60 units we're working on, and we're working closely with the URA on that. It's in very early stages of master planning. So we're excited about that. We've also got another project on workforce development in Hazelwood, which we're working. This would include, you know, maybe potentially purchasing some real estate and revamping it for tradesmen skill training for construction trades. So that's another project. We're also looking at a couple of technology-based startup projects, very early, one called Loan Buy, which is focused around helping employers pay down student loan debt. And we've got another initiative we've started called Mill20 to connect robotics suppliers with the small and medium enterprises. So we've got a couple of things going on in the opportunity zone. And for us, really what we would like to know is how best should we structure all these projects and take advantage of potential OZFs. Another question that I have in my mind, and maybe this is not the right forum, is should we go form our own opportunity zone fund for $20-25 million, because we have a good pipeline of projects to feed that. So that's I'll stop there, and that's why we're tremendously interested in what this group has to say.
Great, thank you, Krish. Jamie.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Reese with the URA. I work on policy and data analysis to support strategic decision making and communications. A lot of my work focuses around performance measurement and impact evaluation, as well as just strictly public policy analysis, benchmarking, and things like that. Excited to be here.
Thanks, Jamie. And James.
Good morning, everyone. I'm James Reid. I'm the Senior Research and Funding Analyst at the URA. Some of the key things that I do at the URA include managing our loan portfolio for the state loan program called PITA, which comes through the Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority. I also serve as sort of the underwriter for a number of our real estate development deals that are primarily involving the commercial side of things. And I also do underwriting for our tax diversion deals. And I also, you know, sort of lead our opportunity zone efforts and, you know, try to assist as I can when it comes to you know, helping to inform decision makers as it relates to attracting new businesses or expanding certain industries in Pittsburgh. And I am also just starting to get involved with our Avenues of Hope initiative, which I hope we will talk about a little bit more in the context of this conversation in opportunity zones. And lastly, as just a couple of brief remarks, I want to say thank you to the Rockefeller Foundation, Locust Smart Growth for these 4 roundtables. You know, each one has brought guests with a lot of knowledge and skills and insights that have really started to help inform our thinking about how we can best, you know, structure our policies to ensure that, you know, development that does happen in opportunity zones in Pittsburgh is mission aligned and also, you know, really helps the city of Pittsburgh further its economic development goals. You know, as these roundtables end, we're looking forward to the next round of work, which I believe is really going to be more of that policy drafting and then guidance to really put some implementation guardrails around, you know, whatever we might do to make this particular incentive more attractive and more visible to, you know, the stakeholder communities in Pittsburgh.
Great, thank you, James. I think we have a good presentation ahead of us today that will help answer a lot of outstanding questions and hopefully some of the things that Krish is also curious about. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ian, who's going to kick us off this morning, sharing a bit more about his experience as an economic development professional, the journey through offsites, and some of the key takeaways from that process. So Ian, I'll let you share your screen and get us started.
Okay, great. I am ready to do that. Do you need to prompt me to do this?
Oh, yes,
or?
sorry, I do.
Okay.
Oh no, you're still the presenter. You're still the presenter.
Okay. Stand by one moment then. Screen preview. Wonderful. Please let me know when you're able to see my screen.
We can see it. Yep.
Great. Are you also seeing me?
Yes.
I don't know what your view looks like. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So this is great. One last moment. So once again, I'll just take this opportunity to thank the folks at Smart Growth America, and I guess as proxy to the folks at Rockefeller for putting this together. And what Tola and the folks at SGA and Locust had asked me to do was to share some best practices and sort of a little bit, as Tola just mentioned, about what I'm seeing in the space and my journey in I have kind of a unique role in the space in that, not unlike John, I would go right along and say, similarly, I'm not an expert in the policy side of the OZ space. And with a caveat that I spend a lot of time in the space, but my role is as a connector. And so if you recognize that what I do every day is really run a technology platform, so that what I'm going to share with you now has come from my experience in working really very closely with hundreds and over the years, actually thousands of different users. And I refer to them as users because, again, we host a technology forum or a forum via technology around opportunity zones. So what I thought I would share today, because I know that URA has been involved in the space for some time. I know that you don't need to hear from me about the ins and outs of policies and the little, twists and turns around compliance. What I thought the best thing for me to do today is to pick up on some of the themes that we've been hearing about, working with, and actually have recently started writing about in the space. And that's why my title slide says, Know Your Partners. Here's what I thought would make a lot of sense for people to think about as you work in the space, whether you're the gentleman that we heard from earlier who's structuring a fund or perhaps structuring a fund, or you work with the city or a county or state or other local government, or you're in the economic development space, or perhaps even more notably, if you're in the private sector, maybe you're a project sponsor yourself or you're an investor with capital gains looking for a project. Here's what I would like to share with you today. And everything I'm going to share comes from my experience working with others, not my personal experience as an investor or a project sponsor or a local leader. Because again, I held this sort of a different position of more like a ringmaster, connecting people who are in the space. When everyone started talking about OZs a couple of years ago, really, we were focused on the big number that was running around was 6 trillion, right? Everybody said, oh, well, there's $6 trillion of pent up capital sitting on the sidelines, right? You heard that a lot. Everyone from notables like Bruce Katz down to everybody who was trying to put a fund together was out there saying, hey, there are these trillions of dollars and, you know, sitting in the stock market, sitting in appreciated business assets, real estate assets. And we can put that all into a fund and deploy it into underserved communities that had, for all intents and purposes, been off the radar of institutional capital for decades in this country, and for a variety of reasons. And I'll get into some of that in a bit. What we did is we took a little bit of a different tack, and we said, you know, okay, setting the capital on the side for a second, let's think about opportunity zones from the spirit of a law that says, another way of looking at it, there are 31 million Americans living in and working in the nation's designated opportunity zones, right? 31 million. And what we did is we set out to see who some of them were that were actually starting businesses. So this is Doug Stewart. He's actually in Oakland. I've never met him, but I've spoken to him a couple of times. And Doug was the first Black man in California to get the requisite licensing to host and actually incubate other businesses that were doing CBD work inside of Oakland. He was trying to raise money, and he had not raised any money successfully from commercial institutions for a number of years, even though he had a designation in the space. This is Julie Kim. Julie was running a ag tech business in Fresno, California, again, California, and was raising literally hundreds of millions of dollars to advance technology research around new agricultural products. This is Michael Johnson. Michael Johnson is a developer here who was trying to build what you see and got a lot of, which is that tower, and got a lot of pushback from the community because there was a need for affordable housing and workforce housing, but those numbers didn't pencil on the project that he was doing. This is Sabrina. Sabrina is an economic developer inside of Casper, Wyoming, who for years was trying to find private sector partners for 35 acres of land that they controlled and actually had EPA grants from and had done a lot of work to clean and prep along the river. And that's the Platte River. So why do I share this? I share this because even though we talk about trillions of dollars, what we're really talking about is everyday people putting together everyday deals to do everyday projects, with a caveat, they're not actually everyday projects. A lot of these projects are projects that have been on the sidelines and haven't been able to be funded and haven't been able to be structured in a way that really made sense when taken exclusively through a private sector diligence and risk management lens. They just weren't necessarily moving forward. And each one of the ones that I showed you has a success story associated with it. And that is by virtue of the fact that there was a collaboration that ensued between public sector and EDs and EDOs and EDCs, like some of you on the call, and the private sector into helping the deal get together. And that leads me to this slide, which I will enjoy as much as the next person, which is according to fatherly.com. And by the way, I will cop to the fact that that was, the first thing that came up on Google when I was looking for this. 32% of people who marry in 2021 will divorce before their 10-year anniversary, right? 1 out of 3, right? If you go to, 3 weddings in 2021, one of them is not going to make it, right? So why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant because to opportunity zone investors and projects, the incentive is structured in a way where, yes, there is what people call the haircut or the step up in basis on the capital gain tax that's paid on the initial money that's put into the fund after 5 years and 7 years. But the big opportunity in terms of how the law was written really reveals itself and comes to fruition after a 10-year hold. The projects that happen inside of opportunity zones have an incredible incentive associated with them. If you focus on the fact that you can start a project that's worth close to zero today, it's an idea, right? A new business, a real estate project that comes out of the ground from close to zero and gets to 1 or 1 million or 10 million or whatever it becomes. And that delta, that appreciation, that gain is ultimately free of federal tax gains if the fund holds the investment and the asset for 10 years. And that's what's so notable. And that's why I led with the idea that 1 out of 3, just left to our own, we generally don't last for 1 out of 3 of us when we partner up as people don't last for 10 years. And that's another way of thinking about opportunity zones that I'm fascinated by, which is that they are 10-year partnerships, especially the ones where there's a public sector and a private sector collaboration, that you are literally joined together for 10 years in order to see success occur. And that should be the starting point, I believe, for every healthy opportunity zone project going forward, is to start with, if you get into it with that understanding, it really changes the way that you sit down at the table, right? I'll give you an example. A number of real estate investors, especially folks who are simply on the investment side, not necessarily the sponsor side, they tend, when they look at deal flow, they're often, if it's a straight real estate project, they're looking at, and the folks who do this work on the call certainly know this, 3 year, 5 years and out in a lot of the cases, right? They're looking at an IRR in the mid-teens if they can find it, low teens if they can, even high single digits sometimes. And they're thinking about that their money comes out in 3 or 5 years. There's a known asset, so there's going to be value. And they tend to, at that point, that's their cycle, right? They might pay back some debt, they might pay off some equity, and then they might roll the money and move on. This doesn't work that way. This is a partnership that's going to be a journey for 10 years and everything that comes to pass in those 10 years. So what we're seeing in some of the most notable examples of how these partnerships work well together is when people start with that, I guess, disposition of going into it and say, okay, if you were going to start a relationship or take a job or start a company or raise money, which is something I do spend a lot of my time doing, is raising money for technology ventures. It's a really good place to start if you know you're in this for 10 years together, by starting to lay down your common goals, right? And by the way, it's of no coincidence that this 10-year hold is the same duration as a typical venture fund. Because if you remember who is behind this legislation, the likes of Sean Parker and others, a lot of that sideline capital it's tied up in paper money, right, which would be appreciation on technology investments that were coming out of Silicon Valley, which were the impetus behind Sean Parker's interest in seeing a place to migrate that capital and in seeing a way of funding new ventures that in 10 years they could divest that fund and pay back that fund. So think about it in terms of 10 years. And then now you're into something for 10 years. So what are you going to start with? Well, we have common goals, right? What are the common goals? Value creation, whether that's neighborhood development, it could be infrastructure, workforce training, jobs, housing, right? These are the sorts of things that public sector folks talk about, right? Another primary shared goal is getting projects done, right? Private sector needs to get projects done to remain in compliance, right? It can't just be waffling, right? Things need to come out of the ground. They have to show progress. And for the public sector, getting a project done is everything. It's everything, especially if it's a first project in an OZ that hasn't seen projects. And a lot of that, of course, is because investment begets investment, right? If you show something getting done, even if it's not perfect, it shows progress, it shows a community on the move, and it attracts other investors. The investment community is not a random assortment of investors. They track each other's work and they look to see where progress is being made and they try to follow. So with that in mind, we often look at the opportunity zone space not as sparks, but as a long, slow burn. So now, what does it take to know your partner? Well, interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to prepare an article, which will be in April's edition of the Opportunity Zone magazine. And if you're not a subscriber, now's a great time. So there is, in fact, a magazine called Opportunity Zone Magazine. It's published by the folks who run the OZ Expo, which I believe are the same folks who used to run the EB5 Expo when people were talking about EB5 and not opportunity zones. And in order to write that article, I went around and interviewed a lot of the folks who I knew via their work on op sites. And I asked them some questions. I interviewed a number of project investors and sponsors, and I interviewed a number of local leaders at the local, county, and state level. And here's what I learned. When you think about risk, and that's an important place to start when you're about to get into a 10-year partnership with somebody, you think about who they are and what are the risks associated with being partnered with this person for 10 years? And when the public sector talks about risk, they often talk about, well, there could be environmental risk to a project. There could be social risks to a project. There could be political risk, right, associated with the project. Maybe the politics aren't aligned, or we've got this one council member and they're not so sure they want to see that. So we heard a lot of that. There's also personnel, right? In 10 years, the length of a project, you're likely to see a couple of changes of local leaders, local elected officials, right? City councils. You're also likely to see even personnel changes in the economics and economic development, community development groups. So thinking about that risk side to a project is vital. On the private sector, there was simply one word we heard, and we heard it time and time again, which is there is financial risk for us here. And that's it. Financial risk, financial risk, financial risk. And the reason they say that is simple. Opportunity zone investors have options. They're looking at 8,700 possible locations to put their money. It's like looking at 8,700 funds, right? Think about it that way. And they've got lots of options. And if you've got capital, word gets out and lots of project sponsors are peppering them every day, like, check out my project. It's senior housing. It's in Mesa, Arizona. Check out my project, right? It's going to be this new hotel development. It's in downtown Pittsburgh. So they're getting pulled in lots of directions and looking at lots of projects. The risk for them is simply to make the right decision and not to place money where it either doesn't become successful or over 10 years, there's no appreciation, or worse, gets held up and the project doesn't move forward, right? And that could be a political or community related holdup. And then there's the entire loss of the opportunity cost where they could have maybe put that money someplace else because they're no longer in compliance. And that's why the little quote on the right, it's not my quote, but it's something to think about, which is investors obsess over what can go wrong. They obsess about it. And local leaders focus on a wish list of what they want to see happen, right? And that's sort of what we do every day, right? As these two different partners entering into this 10-year relationship together. So we created some sense of responsibilities that we're actually sharing publicly now. And we offer them both to sort of like the two sides of this partnership, right? The first one that I'll roll through is the public sector one. And especially when you talk about bringing impact, and I know that a lot of the impetus for this conversation and this roundtable is, hey, how do we attract impact to Pittsburgh, right? Impact. It's a very popular word. It's a word that a lot of people are talking about, right? We want to see a lot of impact. Well, what we would recommend is know what you mean by impact specifically, right? And then itemize that impact in numbers. What are the metrics that you think matter when you talk about impact? Is that climate impact? Is it, meaning environmental, right? Are you reducing vehicle miles traveled by putting housing near transit, right? Which is obviously a goal of the work at SGA, right? Are Are you creating workforce education? Is that what you mean by impact? So saying you want impact investment doesn't mean a lot when it comes down to creating a financial pro forma, which is where the investment community starts, right? To underwrite a project. They want to know what they need to achieve and how they're going to achieve it, right, for their investors. So we strongly encourage the public sector to consider the responsibility, if you're going to use the word impact, to know what you mean. What specifically do you mean when you say impact? What is it that you want to achieve? And to be realistic about those expectations in light of the fact that you are a proponent of encouraging the private sector to invest in an area that, for all intents and purposes, probably doesn't have a lot of comps, right? People can't just look into the area and say, oh, well, this project sold for this and that project sold for that, so I know what we're getting into, right? There's a lot of guesswork. And that the likelihood of the success of that project to the investment community isn't 3 to 5 years now, but what's going to happen over 10 years. So when you talk about your impacts, talk about them over a 10-year lifetime. What of the journey of the finance of the project? What are the impacts that you want to accomplish, and how do you as the public sector intend to play out your role in supporting the achievement of, or the accomplishing of those impacts over 10 years, with a clear and candid recognition that you're not going to necessarily get all of them, right? And that you have a distinct and unique hand in making them happen, allowing them to happen. And I'll give you a quick example, the one on the right. One of the investors, or developers rather, that we spoke with is a guy named Matt. He works with House Investments out of Indiana. And he said, look, the best partner we ever had to do our impact work was the city of Evansville, Indiana. And when they went into the first meeting and said, well, we've got this housing project we want to build, the city came to the table with a list of their goals, itemized, with numbers. This is how many units we want. These are the types of community benefits we want to see happen. These are the mobility improvements we want to see to the community. I mean, hard numbers. They basically were speaking the language of the investment community by putting it down on paper and saying, this is what we intend to accomplish. And then, better than that, they had a plan. They said, we are applying for these grants. We have these capital sources that we're bringing to the table because we, the community, have the following goals, right? And they could describe those goals in an asset strategy, an asset-based strategy. They said this many units, this many, we're going to do this work on the corridor, the actual public realm of the corridor, this much park and open space. They had their numbers. And then you can take the investor pro forma on the project and the community's impact goal matrix and put them together, and now you're speaking the same language, right? And you have something to measure over time. Are we getting there? We're 3 years in. Are we getting there? We're 5 years in. Are we getting there? We're 7 years in. So that would be a key role of the public sector, is not to say we want opportunity zone investment, but to say these are the things that we're trying to accomplish, and here's how we're going to work with you, opportunity zone investor, in order to accomplish them while helping you accomplish your specific goals, right? Okay, other side of the this marriage is the private sector when the projects are public sector, private sector projects. So I spoke with a guy named Kunal Merchant, who, if you don't know him, is a guy who runs a nonprofit called CalOZ, and they are basically a lobbying group in California trying to encourage our state's legislature to embrace and be in compliance with the federal opportunity zone benefits, which we're not, by the way. California does not comply. I think it's us and Arkansas, maybe one or two others, at the federal tax gain level. And Kunal had a really, really great comment that I want to share with you all. And that is that the first responsibility of the private sector, especially if you're going into a community where you haven't worked before versus, say, homegrown, is to recognize that you're investing in a community that probably has been presented to you as, well, this is, impoverished and underserved, which is why it counts, right, for this incentive. But to recognize that it didn't fall into the category of impoverished and underserved and underinvested by chance, and that there are deliberate and I think well-known policies and politics that have occurred in this country for generations that often have created the economic environments that have led to some of the opportunity zone communities being outside of the stream of institutional capital. And that you're not entering into a community where people cannot or will not create value unto themselves, but simply haven't been given, in some ways, a fair shot or the tools and access to capital sources in the past to do that work. And therefore, one of the key takeaways from my conversation with Kunal is that when developers and investors come into a community where they haven't worked before, the first step is to be humble and to enter into the community not feeling as though, well, that I'm coming in here with a bunch of money and I'm going to save this place, and therefore I'm entitled to, get all these benefits and tax breaks and, sharing arrangements and incentives, but rather to come in and say, I'm coming in here as a partner, and to do that sincerely. In fact, we know of a number of project sponsors who, when they sat down at the table in their community meetings, shared their diligence, actually opened their book and said, listen, this is how we're pricing this project risk for ourselves. And we're sharing that with you, the community. This is how we see the risk associated with building this workforce housing project in your community. And I'm going to share it with you with our numbers, right? So that you can understand our perspective coming in and we can all be on the same page, right? And in doing that, you show in a sincere way that you're a partner, you're only going to do well if everyone else who's there, the existing residents and stakeholders, do well, and that you're basically hitching your wagons together. And the ultimate shared goal is prosperity. So one of the first responsibilities of the private sector, notably when going into an opportunity zone where they don't currently have a history, is to be humble. We strongly encourage everyone to partner with a local community organization. And that doesn't mean just tying one up as a tenant in your building so that you can go to the meeting and say, well, these guys are our tenant. It means actually working with community-based organizations so you can learn from them. And there's actually an incredible amount of benefit that the private sector can learn by working with community-based organizations. And I'll give you one for the investors and developers on this call or who may listen to this video. One is this. If the community hasn't seen a lot of investment in the past, one of the best things you can learn about that community is what has gotten it through the downturns in the history. How did it come back from 2008? How did it come back from economic downturns in the past? What are the local assets? And when I say assets, I'm talking about the people, the institutions, what has been its strength, its internal strength, the community's internal strength in the past that you can tap and build on. And working with community-based organizations is a great way to uncover that and partner with it. Okay, I'm just going to move along here in the auspice of time. So just a little bit of summary. Good opportunity zone projects generally check 3 boxes, and they are that they are financially sound. Why is a project financially sound? If you ask anyone in the investment community about the tax benefit, you're going to hear, yeah, it's nice, the step up in basis over time, but everybody's in this for the 10-year hold. And the 10-year hold, again, to reiterate, is only valuable if there is appreciation, if a project is profitable. If the project doesn't appreciate and is not profitable over 10 years, there is no capital gains tax to be paid, so there is none to be saved. Say it more clearly. After 10 years, you're looking at a seller's market in opportunity zones. Oh, that's probably a good point that I should have made earlier. It's important to remember in 10 years to achieve the highest level benefit of opportunity zones, assets will be sold. So think of yourself at the beginning of, now you're in the buyer side of the community, the investment side, and 10 years from now, people will divest of those assets. So if the asset hasn't appreciated, then that entire 10-year payoff of not paying federal capital gains tax on the asset is moot, right? So projects need to be financially sound to begin with. They must, and then they must appreciate over that 10 years. And for a project to appreciate, whether it's a business or a real estate project, that means that the neighborhood around the project needs to do well. So a good partnership focuses on the entire area coming up over 10 years. Regulatory certainty. Every investor with whom I've worked, spoken to, seen on the platform, received an email from, they want to find communities where they'll be welcomed with open arms, full stop. There's not enough time because of the compliance requirements associated with the OZ investment to get a project tied up in entitlement or politics. There just isn't time. It's just not an additional risk factor worth taking on when you already have so many others investing in an opportunity zone to begin with. So they want to find communities where the community says, we're going to approve this project. We understand your timeline as an investor, and we're going to work with you, right? And then the third component that a good opportunity zone project has is community buy-in, where you know, and again, that goes to risk from the private sector. Are we going to run into opposition? Are we going to run into NIMBYs? Are we going to run into no, no, no? Because if we are, we could lose our investment here, right? We could lose our share. So financially sound, regulatory certainty, and community buy-in. And notably, that both partners are aware of this, speak openly about it, and say, look, these are the risks, and this is where we want to build our strategy. Okay, this is my last slide. At the end of the day, you know, investments, especially in opportunity zones, is really about creating long-lasting relationships. So again, I started with that comment about the divorce rates for people getting married in 2021. I did that a little bit to be cheeky, but also as a reminder of that it takes dedication and often compromise to get through 10 years of anything, you know, and to remember that that's where you're starting. And that's why actually some of the work that we do at OpSites, beyond hosting a marketplace and hosting a networking platform, is we offer communities the ability to not only host a profile, to share their opportunities, but we strongly recommend that when you talk about your vision and you detail your vision for growth, and you know, the word prospectus is obviously a very popular term right now. A prospectus from an economic development perspective often to us looks a lot like sort of a plan that cities have written in the past. And by the way, I used to write a lot of those plans, which is like, here's our vision, here's our project opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. A prospectus from an investor's perspective looks a lot like 5, 7, 10. It looks a lot like, here's the appreciation we expect to see and the goals we expect to see in 5 years, because that we have to hold that long to get our first tax benefit. After 7 years, we get our additional secondary tax benefit. And if we're going to get the big play here on our investment, which is the equity multiplier, right? Not just the percentage, we're in this for 10 years. So if I'm a community or an economic development organization building a prospectus, I'm going to have a 10-year plan about what I am going to do over 10 years to advance not only this project, but the area around it. With that, I'll just once again say thank you to the folks at SGA and Locus, and also to remind everybody on the call and watching the video that the marketplace and networking platform that they host for their Opportunity Zone Academy cohort can be found at opsites.com/SGA marketplace, and you will find dozens of project opportunities that are investable and that have the commitment and the backing of local leaders who have thought this all through, who've thought about bringing walkable projects into their communities, and they range from towns in Massachusetts to the folks at the Chicago Opportunity Zone Consortium to folks in New Orleans, and they're all working with SGA and of course Pittsburgh, and they're all working with SGA to make sure that that political support and community buy-in's in place, so that when investors come to the table, the projects are ready to go. So with that, I thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Ian. And I should add that the URA does have a few projects up on the marketplace already. So for folks who are on this call or will be listening to the recording, a plug for the work that the URA has already done on the marketplace.
By all means.
So with that, does anyone have any questions for Ian before we turn it over to John to share his experiences?
I do.
Sure.
Thank you. I was, first of all, I think that the responsibilities that you laid out on the public sector side are going to be extremely helpful for us, so I really appreciate that. On the impact measurement, I have done, like, I guess I've undertaken a wide variety of impact evaluation for social benefits, and on the sort of lower rigor scale, there's like very simple feel good metrics, you know, this is how many people are being helped, this is, you know, et cetera. And then on the higher, sort of like the highest effort side of things is what you would see from like a social impact bond or pay for success, where you have, you know, sort of return on investment calculations that have to be backed up by evidence, and they have to be evaluated by a third party, and they're, you know, so the structure is so formalized that it's written, you know, it's codified. And so I was just wondering, like, where along that spectrum do you think is the appropriate amount of rigor and I don't want to say effort, but the amount, because just to get a handle on the resources that would be required to create something like that and keep up with it.
I think that's actually, okay, thanks for that. I think that's a fantastic question. It's a little out of my expertise in terms of being project specific. I think the best thing that I could say in response to that would be that I can probably send to you some examples of what I've seen in that side of it from economic development organizations, but I haven't been privy to any that made their way directly into some sort of a diligence for a project where you can say, okay, these are costs associated with achieving certain impacts. The one I was thinking of was in Evansville, Indiana, that I mentioned. I can certainly reach out to them. I know them and they're on the platform, and ask them for a copy of what they prepared, and I'd be happy to do that on your behalf. But that's not, it's just not anything that I have my own personal expertise in.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. That would be wonderful.
Sure, make a note of that.
And if you want to stop sharing your screen, Ian,
sure,
you can do that. Anyone else have any questions?
I will jump in. Ian, I really appreciated the information that you provided. A lot of it seems to me like the ultimate framing, or the highest level of framing for this, is relationship development and management, right? And that's a lot of, I guess, upfront work, you know, from all of the partners that are involved. So I guess my question is, you know, to what extent are we just going to be relying on, or to what extent have you experienced this just being sort of the typology of the people, you know, who are involved in general? Meaning, like, are you seeing a lot of investors who are sort of opportunity zone curious, or more of the investors that are already intrinsically motivated to want to make this tool work and deliver those impacts?
Yeah, great question. So let's identify what we mean when we say investors. A lot of folks, so the typical structure that's in the let's say the commonplace structure is you have a fund manager, right, whose job it is to call investors or who they know and say, do you have any gains you want to put in our fund? Investors are often a couple of steps, especially if you're working with a fund. It could be a couple of steps removed. They're just money guys, money ladies who have money, and they put money into a fund because they have a money manager. And the money manager says, by the way, we're putting this OZ fund together, you should come in. And they put the money in. The fund managers are then responsible for finding project sponsors, right, who are developers often, if you're talking real estate, that they work with. And then those developers are typically the ones who have those relationships, right, with folks like you in the cities and the EDOs. That's a very common structure where you're not really working directly with the investors, but you're working with either somebody who's like essentially a representative of all of the money in a fund. With that said, there are growing, and I expect to continue to grow, and I always thought that's what it was supposed to be about, version of opportunity zones where local folks who have gains in your community can leverage this tax incentive to actually build projects using the opportunity zone tax incentive, but just structured as a single asset fund, and they're going to build, they're going to expand or build a new business and they might do that with their own money. So it doesn't have to be this sort of top-down play. Opportunity zones was really built, and what I candidly like about it the way it's built as an incentive is it's really there to empower folks from the ground up, which means that you can be building relationships with the people in your community, right, who have businesses and or real estate inside of opportunity zones, so as to educate them about this opportunity, small o, for them. And in doing so, that's where the relationship can start, is at the education side. And that's what I think is incredible. Why it's an incredible program for local leaders is because you don't have to go find a grant or get a federal, HUD grant. This is something you can just educate your community about, and they can do it unto themselves. It's essentially a private sector marketplace. And I think that's the best version of the relationship, is the one that comes where the local leader is working with folks and institutions in their own community. But let me answer the question in a way that I think you actually asked it, which I don't actually think I did, is the relationship side of responsibility from the community in connecting with, like, for example, if you were on OpsTates and you connected with somebody who identified themselves as an OZ investor, what they would probably be interested in is finding investable projects in your community that you would already know about, right? So there's that, right? And that's like what the SGA marketplace does. Like, here's the project pipeline, right? And you guys are, I know, there. And then what the next step is they want to know that their risk is mitigated. One of the key recommendations that we have, well, I don't do this work, I used to do this work, but when you're working directly with communities, is as an investor or a representative investor, one of the best things you can do inside of an opportunity zone project, and it sounds a little backwards, I know from a lot of the work you typically do, is to actually talk to the investors before you go out to the community to build support or ideate for a project. When I was doing consulting work, we used to do a lot of community visioning work, for an area, and say, what do we want to see here? And wouldn't it be great if, and pink stickers and green stickers and all that work. And then what happens is you build up expectation for what's possible, right? And then you go to the development community and the investment community afterwards, you say, well, here are all the expectations. And when you say those things, like, here's what everybody wants to see, here's our vision, you know what the investors often see? They see risk. They see, oh, you guys have this idea for what you want this to be, and that idea hasn't been run through our diligence machine, our underwriting machine for this area. And if we can't meet that, this is going to be like a train wreck, because everybody's going to think, well, wouldn't it be great if, and we would have this and a Trader Joe's and a blah, and it would all be part of this thing and workforce. And then the investors are coming in and they're saying, well, now we've got this hoop we have to jump through. And if we don't, we're going to go back to our investors and say, your money's at risk, right? So one of the things that you can do, especially in communities where there aren't comps, and by which I mean projects that have seen market rate investment and turned to profit and gotten out, is to start with the investment community and say, let me get an understanding of what you think's possible here. I'm the urban redevelopment guy. Let me get a sense of what you think's possible here. And then let me take that out to the community and build support for it, right? Which is doing it the other way, but it reduces the risk. And it's just a different way of creating that partnership.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Unless before we move on, if anyone, I want to see, does anyone have any questions? Anyone else?
I guess I don't know if it's a question or a comment or just, I just want to talk through that last point a little bit more, because that's something that we've really struggled with, obviously, not only with opportunity investment, but also just, especially larger development projects overall, is that it's sort of the community engagement side is sort of directly at odds with that approach. And even though we understand that that's the realistic, or that's the reality of the situation, it's just not, it's not what the political appetite is, and it's at odds with our mission and what we want to accomplish. So I think, the onus is on us to figure out how to balance that. I do think that, I want to be frank, but not negative. I think that there's an opportunity for us to push back a little bit on it. Like, I think we tend to see it as all or nothing, like it has to be purely community driven, or we have to just, I can't figure out the right word. We have to like default to what the developer and the investor say that they would need to see. And I think some of the things that we've worked on internally are ways to sort of validate and vet that. So we've been investing in some, and I'm the analytics person, so I think about things like economic impact analysis. Like we'll get told we could spur this kind of economic activity, and I think most of the time people are spot on. They're professionals in the field, but it gives us a sense of security knowing that we have like validated against that. So I guess, I don't know, I was wondering like who on this call has thoughts about this? How do we balance that? Because it just doesn't seem like we've met in the middle yet.
Well, I guess, I don't know if when you say who's on the call, I'll give you.
It's for everyone. Yes, question for everyone.
I'll tell you a quick story on that, which is I want to say it was 2016, I think. It could have been earlier. OpSites was an idea. I hadn't funded it, and it was sort of like a Google map based. It was Google Earth, if you remember what that was, had an API and whatever. I was at a ULI, Urban Land Institute event in San Francisco at the Moscone West Center when we used to go to things, IRL. And I was in the building, and it was September, and there were thousands. I think it was the fall, ULI Fall Conference or some big West Coast regional, blah, blah. And there were like thousands of real estate professionals and investors wandering around in blue and gray suits and, sort of like pantsuits, and they were talking to each other. And if you just like listen to the room, they're talking about deal structure. They're talking about deal structure, and they're talking about deal structure. And by the way, that was a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Those same days, across the Oakland Bay Bridge in downtown Oakland at the Marriott, which is like the other city, right, over the water, over the bay, was the League of Cities conference with like city managers and community development directors, and right, it was like I think it was like the California League of Cities annual gala or whatever the thing was. And right? And they were literally in one building 7 miles away from each other. And I know, because I've been to a number of these like League of Cities events, they're giving each other awards. I don't mean that to sound snarky, but like for like, hey, great plan, or like love what you did, like, and they have like plaques, and there's a lot of awards of like accomplishments of what they got done, and as rightfully so, and what they did. And then in the other building 7 miles away were all the private sector folks. And it was literally in that moment that I had kind of a eureka for what offsites should become, which was this collaboration tool. And there is, you're right, Jamie, there is an assumption from the private sector, if you ask them, that the public sector is like nuts in terms of how they approach what's possible, that they come at it with a wish list and renderings with like kids holding ice cream cones and balloons. And I mean, because we draw these pictures for ourselves, like this is gonna be great. And like, there's like a BRT going by and I believe that that's important. And I think it's vital that you know what you want to see happen, and then you structure policies and incentives accordingly. And the private sector, the public sector has this like assumption that the private sector is a bunch of like Darth Vaders, just trying to come in there and like take all the value and for themselves. So what is fascinating about the Opportunity Zone landscape is that it is a 10-year project, and there is a shared goal, and that shared goal is value creation. And one of the things you might consider when you talk about your impacts, it's really about carving up the pie, right? It's like, how much pie can we make when we leverage public sector incentives and policies and abilities to do things, grant getting, with private sector capital, and then who is deserving of that value we create? Should it all go to exist like local residents and businesses, right? Or how much of it can be, put in the coffers of the private sector? And that's ultimately the conversation that probably should be had on day one of a collaboration, is like, what is it that we can do together? And then, to be blunt, like, who gets what? Like, who's entitled to what here? But I think the best Opportunity Zone efforts, and which is ultimately so unique about this program, is that it requires for an asset to become valuable, everything around it has to become valuable. Let me make that last point, and then I'll stop talking. I think I've been talking way too much on this. For an asset to be valuable to the investment community, even if they're passive investors, they're selling that asset in 10 years. Remember that. They're coming in now and they're getting out. Now they might restructure or whatever, but they're basically doing a financial restructuring in 10 years. The best way to sell an asset in 10 years is when there's a lot of demand for that asset, right? You want to buy a house in a neighborhood, and then in 10 years, think of like a single family house. In 10 years, wouldn't it be great if that whole neighborhood was like coming around and there was a Trader Joe's and everything else, right? And then you're like, I'm gonna make a killing because I got the delta. I came in, and then 10 years later, when I was ready to get out, everything around it was better. The private sector needs that to happen. They're not gonna build a project, and then in 10 years, if nothing around that project has gotten any better, that project's not gonna be worth a lot when they have to divest of it, a lot more than they put into it. So when you talk about impacts, talk about metrics, talk about the neighborhood, talk about the community. Don't talk about just the asset. It's not just the building, it's everything that's going on around it. And that's the story to tell to the private sector about, look, this whole area, here's what we're gonna do. This whole area is going to be coming up, and you're one part of that. And with that, I'll mute myself.
Okay, thank you, Ian. So in the interest of time, we wanna give John a chance to share his perspective, and I do think it's very relevant to the conversation we're having, and be a nice continuation of the topics we've touched on. So with that, thank you, Ian, and I'll turn it over to John.
Yeah, thanks, Tola, and again, thank you to SGA and all of your partners for having us here today. And Ian, I mean, I really enjoyed that presentation, although I was on an emotional roller coaster throughout it, right? Because there were things I was like, man, I really agree with that. And other things I'm like, man, I'm going to make a point in my presentation that might be directly counter to that, because, working for a municipal league, I've been on stage giving those plaques to our communities for, the type of development they've done, the education programs we've ran. So it's really interesting to listen to that. And actually, I'm going to start today a little where you ended, but actually where my presentation was going to end today. Now, I don't have a lot of slides. Excuse me. I'm going to show you our website of some stuff that we did and two quick things. But I'm going to more just have a conversation. But Ian, you said something towards the end of your presentation about making this investment more local, right? And one of the things that we really talked about as we got into looking at and dealing with our communities and their thought process around opportunity zones was the concept of unlocking local capital, right? Is really where the big portion of this success we think can lie. So that was my closing. So you heard that early on, but let me just get to where I was going to start and tell you a little bit about who we are as an organization and how we got to this process of running what we called an investor summit. Who our partners were, what it looked like, what our challenges were, both from a logistical side, just putting the event together, man hours, those types of things, versus what we got on the back end in terms of outcomes or what we wanted as outcomes and maybe we did or didn't get. So the Michigan Municipal League is the voice of cities and villages across the state, much like the Pennsylvania Municipal League would be. We have 533 cities and villages in our state. We represent nearly all of them. So for us, it's a lot more about member retention than it is member attraction. We do everything from, as I had mentioned early on in this call, our advocacy efforts at the state capitol in Washington, D.C. We run education programs for our members, everything from continuing ed to information for newly elected officials. We do our typical events that we have out there, everything from a major conference in the fall to a legislative-based conference in the spring. And then we do, which is something that is critically important for our members in the state of Michigan, because, again, you look at sort of the Rust Belt states and the Midwest and some of the impacts of the Great Recession. What we see in Pittsburgh is not dissimilar from what we see in Detroit in a lot of ways, or many of our Michigan communities. We were crushed, to be very honest with you. And we lost, mainly through contraction, capacity at the local level. And when you don't have capacity at the local level, it's very hard to put things together to then be attractive, right? I mean, you're really just managing, keeping the doors open. I mean, I can tell you, I walked into the city of Pontiac shortly before the pandemic and met with the mayor. And Mayor Waterman down there, she's fantastic, doing a great job in the city. But City Hall, from an employee perspective, was empty, right? Where they used to have hundreds of employees making sure that community ran and operated and provided core services was almost non-existent, right? The fact that we are doing more with less is a challenge as we look to move ourselves forward. And so, one of the things that we have done organizationally that I think our executive director, Dan Gilmartin, has really been one of the leaders on. And Ian, you may know of Dan, and, Dan runs in the circles with the Bruce Katzes of the world and, a lot of other people that speak on placemaking. That's really one of the concepts that he brought to the state of Michigan. And for a decade plus now, we have been working to push this narrative around placemaking, which when we first started that, and I love it when he gives this talk, so I'm more than happy to plagiarize him because I think he's spot on. Everybody thought we were on a social mission with that, right? And it wasn't that at all. I mean, it was a pure economic mission for our communities. I mean, we recognized where all the metrics were taking us, right? We studied the state, we studied the nation, we studied the globe, and really found out that it was the place that was changing the dynamic of the environment, right? And it was what was making things attractive both to people and to business. And in Michigan, we have not just underinvested, we have simply disinvested in our communities, right? So what we are on a path for now, and this is my build up to how we're getting to the Investor Summit, is changing the narrative, not just to talk about placemaking, but this concept of community wealth building, right? Which is talked about in different circles. Again, Bruce has talked about those types of things. And so we're really trying to figure out what that means for Michigan, right? And so I'm gonna show you 2 quick slides here, assuming that I can share my screen. Actually, Tola, I think you need to maybe give me access. Thank you.
Should be good now, John.
Yep. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So this is just 2 quick slides in a presentation both Dan and I have given over the time. And this is, I will say, kind of our working definition of community wealth building in Michigan. And when we relate this to our placemaking journey we've been on, that's been an evolution and growing concept for more than a decade now. But this is where we're starting with community wealth building, and this concept that it really occurs when community leaders, partners, and residents collaborate to develop equitable, resilient, adaptable, sustainable places that improve the human experience, right? And think of it as placemaking with an equity lens, right? Ian, in your presentation, you talked a lot about people and the return in 10 years. And that investment needs to see the path that you're on. And community wealth building is this step beyond Main Street and the facade improvements. It's really what's behind that, which gets you into those neighborhoods and gets you into those areas where if you're going to see improvement and you're going to see equity in your community, that's where you need to focus, right? Community leaders, and not that this is wrong by any means, but they got to balance budgets. They need to do a lot of things in which to make sure that the community continues to be stable. But we really need to start shifting some of our focus to people, okay? And so when we talk about metrics, one of the things in which we are doing is starting to develop metrics around some core areas. And again, as I mentioned, still being worked out. So as I show you this next slide, it's really meant to represent that this is in draft form. So, when we think about community wealth building and the framework that's associated with it, 2 really key factors here. You've got to have trust and belonging as your foundation for making sure that you do have this place as a community that is equitable and serves everyone. And then the question really becomes, what do you do surrounding that, right? Like, what are the key assets that are associated with it? Now, organizationally, we've identified different assets over the course of time. These are our sets of assets that we really think are the next area where we will want to build metrics around and show that development and growth in our community is not only going to provide advantages, both to residents and businesses and the community itself, but is going to be sustainable long term. So, when we look at learning, initially we had that written out as education, right? But what's education? Many times people think about K-12, but it needs to be much more encompassing than that, right? So it's not just K-12, it's higher ed, it's continuing ed. When we think about virtual and built infrastructure, just the concept of broadband, pandemic highlighting that even more so. But how do you create something that's there? When we look at our natural assets in the environment, economic and financial security, that's not just necessarily making more money, but that's, again, creating the stable foundation for those in those neighborhoods to continue to move forward, to progress, and to add value. Arts and cultural abundance, right? I mean, think about how boring the community might be without, street art or a museum or a library. I mean, you got to have those assets in which to be attractive. And then now more than ever, public health and well-being, whether that's mental health, whether that's physical health. I mean, all these things are what truly create a community, and it's the investment that we want to see in these areas that we think will drive both development in the future, but also a more equitable environment. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen there and really start talking about now why we made this jump into having a summit. So we have a group of mayors known as the Urban Core Mayors, which I happen to manage, and why I'm really more here today. It's a collection of 13 mayors from our most urbanized places, not always our largest places, right, but our most urbanized. So it's Detroit, Pontiac, Dearborn, Saginaw, Bay City, Flint, Jackson, Ann Arbor, Lansing, Battle Creek, Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids, and Muskegon. Not that you have to remember that, but I can do that east to west, as I think I told Tola, alphabetical backwards and front. But what we see is that they are really our economic engines, right? I mean, that is where all of our activity is driven from, is really these places and then those surrounding areas around them. And what we realized as we were looking at opportunity zones is not only were our communities not necessarily prepared for that, our state in general wasn't prepared, right? When you look at what other states have done in terms of promoting and trying to elevate opportunity in those zones, we didn't have that. And so we really thought that there was a void that us as an organization could help fill. Because if you go back to the capacity argument, even in our major areas, right, they struggle with capacity, right? They really do. And so because us organizationally has that capacity, we're able to do some things for them in a way that they might not always be able to do for themselves. And because we had this collection of communities, to us, it was the perfect starting point to have this conversation, but do so with the word I like to use is intentionality, right? So it wasn't just to think about this as a one-time shot at creating investment. It's really about changing the narrative and showing something that can be scalable to many different sizes of communities throughout the state, because it's not necessarily what we put on paper that day, but it's the process by which we did it, what is there, and what we want to achieve out of it that is really, really important. So part of our strategy was to focus on the right investment, right? Which gets us to that local capital concept. But to be honest with you, we also needed partners. So one of our key partners in this was a group known as Accelerator for America. They're based out of California. We got hooked up with them randomly, to be very honest with you. And those initial conversations really sparked a budding partnership that we have with them now. And so they were able to provide us some technical assistance to help our communities through this process. But they were also able to provide us with their Rolodex a little bit, right? From a national perspective, which we didn't always have at the local level or even organizationally. Do we know some people in the state and nationally? Absolutely. But we didn't know everybody, and it wasn't necessarily our thing. So Ian, when you look at what you have done, with your site, we didn't have that. And so we had to really think about how we attract and bring people together and who we wanted to bring together. And so we set goals in terms of, the types of people we wanted to attract and who we wanted to attract. So, I have intentionally hesitated till this point to tell you exactly what the Investor Summit is, because I wanted to set the stage, right? So initially we were planning on an in-person event. I won't go through all of that, but it created some logistical hurdles as we had to shift and move and go to a virtual platform. But really what we wanted to do was create a space for these 13 communities to pitch investment in their opportunity zones in a way that was direct, succinct, and consistent. So what we ended up doing was putting together a 2-day event, right? About 3 hours each day. It worked better that way rather than asking somebody to sit on a Zoom call or an event all day long. We had a mix of programming, so our speakers that gave some really high-level overview of things. We had our Lieutenant Governor speak just about what's going on in the state of Michigan. and he's very directly connected to that Urban Core Mayors group. But our showcase and our highlight was these 13 communities. And what we did was create a Shark Tank-esque environment where we gave them each 10 minutes to pitch up to 2 sites that they have identified as sites that they wanted to see either invested in or in some cases developed. And we gave them 3 slides to do it in. So we were very prescriptive in how we set it up. You got an intro and you got 1 slide per site. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot because it's not, right? And that was part of the intention. Now on the back end, we helped them build prospectuses. We created a website, and we did a lot of different things to make sure that it could be highlighted at the end of the day. I think the challenge was, and to be honest with you, to say this was or wasn't the right move, I don't know. I mean, I think time will tell, but we provided very little information to investors and developers early on because we felt if we gave them too much, they could make their decisions and wouldn't show up. If we gave them too little, right, they might not be, really understanding what we were trying to do. So we were trying to find that sweet spot in between. And again, that was tough. But I'll be very direct with you. Pulling this off was a heavy lift. I acted as the project manager, and it was more work than I ever thought. When we first had our conversation with Accelerator for America about doing this in partnership with them, my initial thought process was like a 45 to 60 day turnaround. This turned into a year-long venture. Part of that was pandemic related, but part of it was just the sheer amount of time and effort and energy that needed to go into doing something like this, and honestly, doing it right. And again, even listening to what Ian was talking about earlier, I have more questions in my head right now about how successful or maybe little tweaks we might have made. But it really hadn't been done before. There have been other things that have taken place out there. Individual communities have done some things. What Erie, PA has actually done is really phenomenal in terms of their Erie Homecoming. I mean, that's a great example of kind of a individual community doing it. But thinking about bringing 13 communities together, showcasing this and really highlighting the state of Michigan to the country was a significant lift. So we had actually got some grants from the state, both from our Economic Development Corporation and from our state housing authority to help put this together. We capitalized on some of our existing relationships and built some new ones. So we were able to get the Economic Innovation Group involved. Bruce Katz was involved. Mayor Garcetti from Los Angeles was involved through that partnership with Accelerator for America. PNC Bank got involved. And then we broke it down and we really developed teams that were responsible for managing certain parts of this. So we had a communication team, which dealt with all the invites and copy editing and those types of things. We had a creative team, which helped us create the brand for this, right? Helped us build our website, helped us put together the programs and the pitches and a variety of different aspects of that. We had a sponsorship side because we went out and wanted to track some very targeted type sponsors, one from a funding aspect because it did cost us dollars and much to do it, but also from an aspect of wanting to build out partnerships that maybe we didn't have beforehand. We had an actual events team that had to manage the events leading up to that. So everything from putting together, the virtual platform to training speakers on how to use that technology, you name it. And then we had, which was maybe our most critical component of this, and because of our capacity, we actually had 3 individuals specifically dedicated to helping our communities build those prospectuses and develop those 3 pitch slides that they got. And that, when we talk about challenges, that was a big lift. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But I mean, all in all, we had thousands of hours wrapped up into this, well over a dozen of our staff members at times. Even as I got into managing this, you'd think about things like copy editing, right? And our quality control process, because this wasn't just, you know, and not to make light of this call, right? But this wasn't a simple, you know, 8-10 person call. I mean, we ended up having 200 plus people register. Our goal was to have 100 really targeted, you know, investor and developer types in that room. We hit that goal. Now, when we look at that 200 plus number, that included, you know, myself in that registration. That included, you know, our communities and those that did the presentations on behalf of them. But I mean, it was a robust effort, and we had to make sure, top to bottom, it looked and acted and felt like an in-person presentation. So I'm going to show you the website now, because I think it'll give you an indication of kind of what we had to build and what went into that. And I'm going to try and do what I don't do with the remote and surf through pages super quickly like I do on the TV. But if you want me to go back and stop or explain something further, I'll do that. And I'm also going to show you the first few seconds of our opening, so you can see kind of from a production quality standpoint, really some of the effort that went into this. The other thing you're going to see here is the final product. And we went through multiple design changes to the website simply because we had to move, you know, top line, you know, links to click on around to meet what was happening the day of, because this acted as the interface that all attendees would go to. So it did everything from what we did from a registration standpoint to populating it with our prospectuses and pitch slides to actually having them view the event that day. And so again, if you would have looked at this on day one, it looks a little different from a layout standpoint than it does in terms of what I will show you right now. Everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. So this was part of the branding that we came up with, right? So we obviously created kind of, you know, the logo you see there in the middle, the color scheme, you know, the text and the font that you see flows with what we do from an organizational perspective. You know, everything here, if you would have saw it on day one, would have had the countdown clock, you know, counting down, brief explanation, and then we would have had right here more of a registration link rather than this pitch book. And I'm gonna come back to the pitch book here in a second, because that was one of the most extensive, from a creative standpoint, one of the most extensive things and time-consuming things that we had to deal with. The way in which we set this up provided both avenues for attendees and sponsors to interact with people that were there. In the pitch portion of this, in those 10 minutes that I had mentioned, we did not allow Q&A to take place. It was a way for us to kind of control the flow of the event. And instead, what we did is we created what we call the City Expo Hall, which you could go into this, you could click on any one of these links, and as an investor or a developer, you could go and specifically talk with somebody from the city of Grand Rapids, live, one-on-one, you know, give that opportunity to make that connection, exchange information, start to build that relationship. We also did the same thing with our sponsors, where we had dedicated time where attendees or even our communities could go and meet with our different sponsors and talk to them about questions they may have, things that we might be doing at the state level, a variety of other things, you know, typical agenda stuff and things like that. And then this here is really where we built our information base for people day of and after, should they want to get any of that information. This is, our pitch book is a general style program, as you would think. If you think 69 pages worth of programming for this event is typical, but again, everything that you would see from a table of contents, you know, to who our sponsors are, you know, we had a welcome letter in here from Mayor Garcetti, Mayor Bliss, who's the mayor of Grand Rapids and the chair of the Urban Core Mayors, and our executive director, kind of really highlighting what we wanted to do and achieve. And again, yell at me if I'm going too fast, making sure we identify who the leaders in our communities are to those investors that might not otherwise know. Again, agenda, things we're doing here. And then this is really important, and I stop here for a second because it's not directly related to maybe our conversation today, but if you think about doing something like this in a virtual event, information to attendees about how they handle tech and what they should expect and where they can go with questions is incredibly important. And we spend a lot of time thinking about these types of things on the back end. Again, speaker bios and those sorts of things. So I'm gonna back out of this because further on in that program is really what we get into in terms of identifying our specific prospectuses and pitches. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight what the city of Lansing did, just so you can get a feel for what both their prospectus and their pitch looked like. This is the actual 3-slide pitch that they put together. So very general, opening slide. We gave them an opportunity to talk through that city, identify themselves, highlight a few things, and then we were right directly into the development piece that they wanted to see. And we did not control this part of the process as direct as we did some others. We wanted to make sure that they had, some ability to showcase their uniqueness and the things that they wanted to highlight rather than us always just telling them exactly what to do. There were some general things we really wanted to talk, as you see, about the investment opportunity here, put some numbers on paper, get people to have a feel for what was happening. And then, same thing here with this slide, right? Let them do that, talk through it, and then try to push those investors and developers into a space where they could chat with them in that City Expo hall. The next thing I'll show you, that's the city of Muskegon. This is Lansing's full prospectus. Again, nearly 60 pages. And Ian, when you were talking, as I think about Lansing's layout here, some of that, 10-year vision doesn't maybe make its way directly into this, and maybe something that they could incorporate a little bit more directly. But again, this is a lot of those sort of stats and statistics about, what Lansing is and who they are and what they do. And so as they get through this, it will get back into those specific projects, those 2 that you saw in the pitches, but also a variety of other ones. It will talk about, and again, excuse me as I shuffle this pretty quickly down here to the bottom. It will talk about, all of their specific places. It will even get into some of who their local economic development partners are with what they call LEAP. Sorry, I'm going to scroll here quickly. So the Lansing Economic Area Partnership, what they do, how they support it, the different incentives, both statutorily and otherwise, that they can utilize as ways to enhance projects. So, getting our communities to do this and be engaged, this was extensive. Fortunately, Lansing was ahead of the game, but we had some communities, and I'm going to quit sharing my screen here at this point. But we had some communities that had nothing, literally starting from ground zero, as Ian said, and so that was, again, part of our challenge in this. So we knew one of the challenges we would absolutely face was an internal challenge, and that was making sure that we kept everybody on task and on time, because this was not something that we had necessarily built into our normal thought process of how we run the organization. And so we had to all of a sudden build this into everything else we already had going on. So making sure that we kept people on task and on time was a critical component, and one we knew would be challenging. I think some of the unseen was, I don't think our communities up until the very end really understood what we were trying to do, right? That size and the scope of it, right? Like how big this was, how important it was, and really how I don't want to say it's an opportunity. I keep trying to not use the word opportunity, right? I'm sure we all face this as we talk about opportunity zones. But the opportunity it was for them to sit in a room with investors from all across the country. I mean, literally billions of dollars worth of capital, represented. And then the logistical lift, again, I think a little underestimated on our end, just from speakers to, deadlines to you name it. And, I think we did a lot of things well. And then we faced some challenges. I will tell you, we use the platform Visible to do this. And 2 days before, their system quit supporting our video, right? And I panicked in some ways. Fortunately, because of the way in which we split this up into different teams, our events team had built in a backup plan. And so we were prepared. It wasn't easy, but we were able to transition and Zoom interfaces with that platform relatively well. And so we were able to make a quick shift. And from the end user standpoint, it was seamless. From the back end, it was exceptionally challenging for us to manage that. It was a long 48 hours leading up to that event. Our sponsor showcase, we did not have a lot of people attend and go and visit our sponsors, right? And some of that I think had to do with the virtual platform. Just the way people are used to interacting. Walking through an expo hall is different than sitting in your house or wherever you may be at, and then have to go and talk with potential sponsors. And our city expo hall, we thought we would have more people shuffle through and see our communities, and we didn't get that either. Part of that is I think we gave them a lot of information, right? They see the prospectus, they see a lot of things. And I think the other thing we realized is if you got multiple investors in the room, they might not want to go into that room at the same time and talk to the community at the same time. And so that, I think it would have been a mistake if we wouldn't have provided the opportunity. But what we reminded our members of in our cities of is that you shouldn't judge success or failure based on whether or not somebody did or didn't come and talk to you in that moment. And I think that at this point, what I want you to just see is kind of the production side of this for about 30 seconds. And so I'm going to reshare my screen, and then I'm going to come back and talk about kind of our successes and that we had, and then just a couple of closing points. So this is where any attendee would have gone. See if this pulls up here. Would have gone to interact and be a part of the session. So I'm going to open up this recording and hopefully it plays. I tested it earlier, but what you will see here is just the very first few moments of how we kicked off the conference. It leads into Mayor Bliss giving an opening. I won't have you sit through the full 4 minutes of that to listen to her speech. A lot of it's kind of what I talked about earlier when we talked about community wealth building. But here we go. So just to kind of give you a feel for, what the attendee saw there. I mean, we had what we call the voice of God, kind of the voiceover in every aspect of that, and then introduce people to the stage, just like you would in a real event. And that seamless transition that you saw there with Mayor Bliss, although that one was pre-recorded, when we had our live speakers, was the same. So we had somebody on the back end controlling that from a production standpoint, moving that along, because we focused heavily on the attendees' experience, which we thought was critically important to how we showcase ourselves as not only an organization, but as our communities in terms of how prepared they would be. So my guess is the big question that everybody has in their mind is like, who got the deal, right? Like, I mean, who signed the paper? I think what we knew going into this is that organizationally, we weren't going to put the name on the dotted line. That was not our goal. I think that was, any deal that shows up as a result of this is an added bonus. I think where our biggest success lies is twofold. One, our communities are more prepared than they ever were before, and likely would have been had we not had the capacity to help them. I think the other thing that it does is it really starts to highlight and spread our message about community wealth building and what we want to see in Michigan from a development perspective. And I'm gonna close with some points on that. But there are also unseen successes that we didn't anticipate. And right now we are in the process of exploring something that is actually much bigger. We're in the process of talking with a potential investment group that will come in and fund dozens of projects, you know, and do so maybe multiple times a year, because what we've seen, much like Ian talks about, this space in the middle where connections are made isn't great. And so, you know, where we struggle to know who's out there from an investment standpoint, sometimes investors are out there struggling to know where projects are. And our role and our connection to communities provides a great middleman, so to speak, to help make that connection, right? In a way that wouldn't necessarily exist prior to. And so just by chance, just by the chance of somebody seeing our invite, showing up, looking at what we're doing, we are opening the door maybe to not just one or two projects, but really significant investment throughout the state. Now, whether it gets there or not, I don't know, right? You know, we're very early in the process, but if we look at how we were successful and the avenues that have been presented to us as a result of what we did, we think that is exactly the space that we wanted to play in and where we wanted to be. So I think at the end of the day, you know, maybe a little counter to Ian's point, right? And Jamie, you were kind of asking this question, is you really need to decide the type of development that you want. My guess is in every community that has looked at development, every community where the mayor has gone out and cut the ribbon in the last decade, they've done so not necessarily because that's what they wanted and what they had, you know, desired to have. It's because of who came to them. And in Michigan, we were at a point of cutting any ribbon we could, right? We wanted to see everything that we could. We didn't think a lot about, you know, exactly what that meant long term. And opportunity zones are not always going to be the answer, and likely aren't the final answer. They are the gateway, as we see it, to long-term systematic change in the way we think about economic development in our communities. And you really have to be cognizant, and this is why we talk about community wealth building, like where you want to go, what your community is going to look like, ensuring that that's equitable for everybody that's involved in this process. I mean, if you want a server farm on the corner, right, with a chain link fence and 2 security guards, you get that any day of the week is my guess, right? But if you want the corner grocery store, if you want mixed use development, if you want to improve that neighborhood, you need to be much more intentional about what you're looking for and the process that you go through to get there. And I'm not suggesting by any means we did everything right in this process, but I think the path that we're on is to change the narrative about how people think, not only about communities, but about the type of investment they're going to do and the long-term benefit, not just to them individually, but to the community as a whole. And that's why I'll finish where I started. That concept of unlocking local capital is one of the key avenues and pieces in that puzzle. So I'll leave it at that. Again, I really appreciate you having me here. I'm happy to answer any questions and talk through whatever you guys might want.
Thank you so much, John. It's a lot of great info. Anyone have any questions for John?
Ooh, I'm not shy, by the way, right? I tell my members I work with all the time, like, there are no bad questions. I mean, feel free to shout anything my way.
John, I really appreciated the time that you took to walk us through some of the logistics and the complexities, as well as sharing a lot of the finished product that folks were able to engage with. It really looks like it was a true undertaking, and you know, it's good to know that from your all's perspective, the end result wasn't necessarily the metric of how many deals closed at that day, but more that, you know, you're building, in a sense, that piece of marketing infrastructure where in the future, you know, your cities can use these materials going forward. There's always that website that they can point people to, you know, try to call back that experience of the summit and everything like that. I really appreciated that full view of everything that you guys did. I think my question is kind of a little more philosophical and towards some of the beginning material that you mentioned on your slides when it comes to, you know, this concept of community wealth building. A lot of the benefits that you talked about, you know, seemed rooted in place, you know, making place more attractive. To what extent are you seeing that those benefits can spill over or be sort of produced in a tangible way for the people that are either working there or existing or living?
Yeah, so you're right. That's maybe the more exciting part of the presentation, right? I mean, that's where our communities are built and the things that matter to them. I don't think that there is any question, right, that one, the initial journey we were on and continue to be on around placemaking has shown direct benefits both to people and communities. The real question, and I think what we're trying to do, James, in this next step is to really gauge how many people that's impacted. And I think we recognize that it hasn't impacted everyone equally. And so our focus is really more now on how do we take those tangible benefits that we have seen, right? Because we have seen growth in our communities on Main Street. And now we're talking about a lot of big urbanized areas here. But when you think about small towns, right, the revitalization of Main Street, that thought process around walkability has really sparked a lot of new investment. But that might only be on a block or two. Or if you hear about Detroit, everybody asks what's great in downtown, what's happening in the neighborhoods. So shifting our focus, and I know you guys are really focused on what's going on in neighborhoods, to say, well, how do you think about that, quite frankly, in a city like Detroit as maybe a bunch of small towns, right? And really breaking that down into understanding not only the historical fabric, but what the needs are going forward and what your deficiencies are or were coming into it. And I think that's a big part of our process here, is where maybe have we come up short, right? And we don't like to maybe admit fault and things like that. But I think if we recognize where our voids and our gaps are, it will help us better identify how we move forward. And right now, and I'm thinking about through the Michigan specific lens, right? Our ability in some cases to provide basic services has lacked, right? Simply because of disinvestment and lack of funding. But what we are seeing, right, as we tend to focus more on the neighborhood, right, and engaging people, that energy around these changes are substantial, right? Not always seen in the headlines, but felt at the community level. And so I think we're seeing it on a daily basis, and I think we're seeing more and more people understanding the importance. At some point, that's got to translate to policymakers and a variety of other things. But when we break it down community by community or neighborhood by neighborhood, we can point to success after success after success. Now it's about replicating and scaling that to ensure that it is really done in a way that benefits more than even just the state of Michigan, but really changes the dynamic and the thought process nationwide.
So we're about pressing up on 11 o'clock here on the East Coast. Any final questions or thoughts, either from the participants or the speakers themselves?
Chola, this is Krish. Can you hear me properly?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes, great. I just want to, I think this was super helpful and really appreciate the background, the different approaches that were discussed by John, Ian, others. Super helpful. And as a developer, this is interesting for us because it reinforces what we've always felt, that there is a need for strong public-private partnerships. And when the groups are, and I think what was really striking is when Ian said or talked about two sets of groups in two different buildings talking about the same thing and development, that really struck a chord. So for us, I think the public-private partnership is huge. There are different ways to do it. And we are really hoping that we can continue this dialogue with the city of Pittsburgh and the URA to say, how do we work together? While our focus is only on one opportunity zone, there are a number of different opportunity zones in the city. And there is a way to really build a portfolio of projects and showcase the city of Pittsburgh. So thank you again for the invitation. Really appreciate the discussion and the knowledge that was provided.
Well, thank you to John and Ian. John,
yeah. Hey, Tola, I want to say one thing quick, because what Chris just said in terms of these two groups being on other sides, don't forget that happens in cities, right? I mean, your economic development team might be on the third floor, right? And your transportation infrastructure team might be on the second floor, and they might never talk. But the way in which you deal with roads and infrastructure is directly relatable to the way you deal with economic development. And so making sure that those silos don't exist in your own community, which is what we have focused on a lot in some of our training and educational aspects, is critically important to you having successful partnerships with the private sector, right? Yeah. I mean, you gotta have your own house in order, and making sure that collectively, top to bottom, you have those same goals and objectives, and that you are communicating, across those sectors to ensure that we're all speaking from, kind of the same playbook.
Yeah, there is one other group that might be worth mentioning, at least in the city of Pittsburgh. I know that we have many foundations. And, we talked about investors, we talked about city, the URA, but there's lots of foundations in Pittsburgh. And I think that's a third group that needs to be part of this conversation because they have the money. I think in terms of impact, there is alignment. So there's definitely should be some thought given, at least I'm speaking for the city of Pittsburgh, in coordination with these foundations so that there is, how do I say, we can leverage all these different groups and put money and impact, make the right kind of impact here.
Again, sorry, Tola, 100% agree. And we've talked, not only do we have our own foundation organizationally, where we've looked at some of this stuff, even in some ways thinking about starting our own fund at times, but the community foundations that exist out there, and even larger foundations, are a critical component, we believe, to the success, not just in opportunity zones, but overall, and how we think about their role that they might play in economic development. So I think that comment's spot on. The more that you can engage with them, the better it is, and they can be key partners, really in that concept of unlocking local capital, as we had talked about earlier.
Okay. Well, in the interest of everyone's time, I know we've been on for a while, but a lot of great information was shared. So again, thank you to John and to Ian for your time and for sharing your expertise. I see, Ian, the sun has come up behind you now. So we've been on for a while. So as James and I spoke at the beginning of the roundtable, I will add the recording of this conversation to the Dropbox folder we've been using to share resources. And we'll also include a few links of what John shared with us and what Ian shared too, so that we have those available. And from the SGA side, I just want to thank everyone for sticking with us throughout the course of these 4 roundtables. We've covered a lot of ground and are looking forward to what we'll be working on next. So with that, have a great rest of your day and great weekend, everyone.
Right. Thank you, Tola and John and James and Jamie. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Tool.
It's been great.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Nice seeing everyone and meeting everyone for the first time.
Yeah, likewise. Take care.
Bye.